Welcome, friends, and walk with me a while down one of the quietest and most melancholy roads we have ever traveled together. For tonight, we go in search of the forgotten. Once, not so very long ago, the men and women we will visit were the most dazzling creatures on earth. Their faces gazing down from every marquee and magazine cover, their names spoken with longing in 100 million homes. Adored by a whole generation that filled the movie palaces to bask in their glow, they were the icons of 1950s. Hollywood, the golden age of the silver screen, and the world could not get enough of them. And yet today, their graves sit silent and unvisited, the flowers long since withered, the crowds that once screamed their names having drifted away to newer, flashier legends, so that these once blazing stars now lie in a neglect that would have broken their hearts. The tour buses still stop for a famous few, for the blonde goddess and the doomed young rebel whose names everyone still knows, but they roll right past these others, these giants of their day, whose resting places the world has simply forgotten. So tonight we will not forget them. Tonight we will bring them the only flowers that still matter, the flowers of memory, and we will stand at each quiet grave and say their names aloud once more, and remember the beauty and the talent and the heartbreak of lives that burned so brightly and are now so strangely unremembered. You may find as we walk that you know some of these names and not others, and that is precisely the point, for the line between the remembered and the forgotten is drawn by nothing so fair as talent or fame, but by the blind accident of which films happen to be replayed, which images happen to be reprinted, which stories happen to be retold, while the rest quietly slip beneath the surface of memory. A single enduring movie can keep a name alive for a century, while a star who made a dozen hits that time, forgot vanishes utterly. It is nobody's fault, and it is heartbreaking all the same. We will visit 30 of these forgotten icons across the whole of our journey, 15 tonight and 15 more a little further on. We will visit 30 of these forgotten icons across the whole of our journey, 15 tonight and 15 more a little further on. There is a particular kind of heartbreak in these stories, different from any we have known on our other walks. It is the heartbreak of impermanence, of learning how swiftly and how completely the world forgets, even those it once seemed to worship without limit. These were not minor players, but giants, people whose faces were as familiar to their generation as the faces of their own families, whose every romance and heartbreak filled the newspapers, who could not walk down a street without being mobbed. And within a single lifetime, sometimes within only a decade or two, the great tide of their fame simply went out, leaving them stranded in memory, their films unwatched, their names unspoken, their graves untended. If there is a lesson in it, perhaps it is a gentle one, a reminder to hold our own fleeting days a little more tenderly, and to remember that every forgotten grave was once a living soul who laughed and loved and feared, and who deserves, at the very least, to have their name spoken kindly now and then. So take my arm and lower your voice, for this is a tender and a sorrowful walk, and let us go gently among the forgotten stars of Hollywood's golden age. So take my arm and lower your voice, for this is a tender and a sorrowful walk, and let us go gently among the forgotten stars of Hollywood's golden age. Let us begin at the Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City, at the grave of Jeff Chandler, one of the most popular leading men of the entire decade, now scarcely remembered at all. In the 1950s, Chandler was a sensation, a tall, ruggedly handsome actor with a shock of prematurely silver hair that made him instantly recognizable and utterly irresistible to audiences, and he became one of the biggest male stars at his studio, earning an Academy Award nomination and headlining a long string of adventures and romances that packed the theaters. Women adored him, men admired him, and he seemed to have the world at his feet. But in 1961, at just 42 years old, he entered the hospital for a routine operation on his back, and a series of surgical catastrophes followed, and the beloved star died of complications that should never have claimed him. The tragedy shocked Hollywood. And yet today, only a few decades on, the silver-haired idol who once ruled the box office lies here almost entirely forgotten, his grave rarely troubled by a visitor. He had come to Hollywood by way of radio, a New York boy with a rich, resonant voice and a striking presence, and the studio quickly grasped what it had, building picture after picture around him, from sweeping desert adventures to war dramas to swooning romances, and pairing him with the greatest leading ladies of the day. His fan mail arrived by the sackful, and for the better part of the decade he was rarely out of the list of top box office draws. A genuine matinee idol in the grand old style. There was, too, a real gentleness to him, a modesty that made him beloved by his colleagues, and he nursed a lifelong secret wish to have been a serious musician rather than a movie star. His death was as senseless as it was shocking, the result of an operation that went horrifyingly wrong, a blood poisoning that the doctors could not stop, and the outrage and grief that followed filled the newspapers for weeks. Yet the years have been crueler to his memory than to almost any star of his rank, so that the name that once sold 1 million tickets now draws only a puzzled silence, and his fine grave in this hillside cemetery stands quiet and unsought. It is a strange and sobering thing to consider that a man once so famous, whose face the studios plastered across the world and whose every appearance drew crowds, could fade so utterly that the young today have never heard his name at all, that the very definition of stardom he embodied could dissolve so completely within living memory. His fine grave in this hillside cemetery, with its sweeping view, deserves better than the silence it now keeps, and to speak his name here, and to remember the silver-haired idol who once made a whole generation swoon, is a small act of justice against the forgetting. Let his name be spoken here with warmth, the beloved idol time has treated so unkindly. He rests here now, the silver-haired idol the world has let slip from memory. Let us travel now to the Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, to the grave of Mario Lanza, whose glorious voice once made him the most famous singer in the world. Lanza was a phenomenon unlike any other, a Philadelphia boy blessed with one of the most thrilling tenor voices of the century, and when Hollywood made him a movie star, pairing that magnificent voice with his dark good looks and passionate charm, he became an international sensation, his recordings selling in the millions, and his films filling theaters around the globe. He introduced a whole generation to the glories of operatic singing, and inspired countless great voices who came after him. But fame and fortune came with terrible pressures, and he struggled painfully with his weight, with punishing crash diets, and with the excesses of a life lived too hard and too fast. And in 1959, in Rome, his heart gave out at just 38 years old. The voice that had enchanted the world fell silent, and now the great tenor lies here. His once mighty fame faded to a whisper. He had come from a poor Italian-American family, and his gift was so prodigious that it seemed to belong to another world. A voice of such power and sweetness that the greatest names in opera predicted he might have become one of the immortal singers of the age, had he chosen the concert stage over the movie lot. Instead, Hollywood claimed him, and for a few dazzling years he was the biggest musical star in the world, his portrayal of a legendary tenor making him a household name, and his golden records pouring out of radios in every land. He opened the ears of millions who had never dreamed they could love such music, and singers of the highest rank would later say that it was his voice, heard in childhood, that first called them to their art. But the pressures of that stardom were merciless, and his battles with his weight became a torment, a punishing cycle of gorging and starving that ravaged his health. And far from home, in the city of Rome, his overtaxed heart simply stopped. He was not yet 40. The world wept then, but it has since fallen strangely silent, and the golden voice is seldom played, and his grave seldom sought. There is a special cruelty in the forgetting of a singer, for a voice, unlike a face, can be summoned back whole and living from an old recording, and yet his glorious instrument now goes unheard, his records gathering dust, his films unwatched, so that the thrilling sound that once poured from radios in every corner of the world has faded to a rumor. He lies here in this Catholic cemetery among other stars of his faith, and the pilgrims who once would have wept to stand at his grave now pass their days never knowing he existed at all. That so magnificent a gift should be so nearly silenced by forgetting is among the sadder losses on all our tender walk. He rests here now, the golden voice that the world has stopped listening for. Let us travel now to the great Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, to the grave of Alan Ladd, the quiet, intense star who was one of the defining leading men of his era. Ladd rose to fame as a new kind of hero, cool and understated and dangerous, the soft-spoken hitman of the shadowy crime films that made his name, and the buckskin-clad gunfighter of one of the most beloved westerns ever made. A film whose final scene, a small boy crying out a star's name across the mountains, still breaks hearts today. For a decade and more, he was among the most bankable stars in the world, adored for his stillness and his wounded sensitivity. But beneath the fame, he was a deeply insecure and unhappy man, haunted by a painful childhood and by his own doubts, and he sank into a fog of alcohol and pills. And in 1964, he died at just 50, of an accidental and lethal combination of the two. The little boy's cry still echoes, but few now visit the man who inspired it. He had endured a childhood of grinding, poverty, and heartbreak, scarred by his father's early death and his mother's tragic end, and he carried those wounds with him always, a fragile and self-doubting man hidden behind the cool, controlled image that made him a star. He was small in stature, and the studios went to elaborate lengths to make him tower on screen. But audiences never cared, for what they responded to was the stillness and the wounded soul behind his eyes, qualities that made him perfect for the laconic tough guys and haunted heroes he played so memorably. For years he was one of the surest draws in the business, but success never healed him, and as the roles grew fewer and the doubts grew louder, he leaned ever harder on drink and on the pills that were supposed to steady him. And one night the two together stopped his heart in what most have always believed was a tragic accident rather than a choice. He was only 50. The beloved Western in which he starred plays on, its final heartbroken cry immortal, and yet the man who inspired it lies here in a grand cemetery, passed by every day by visitors seeking flashier graves. To watch that beloved Western, even now, is to feel the full weight of what has been lost. For the film endures as a masterpiece while the man at its heart has slipped almost entirely from the world's memory. His other pictures forgotten, his name a blank to all but the most devoted students of the old films. He lies in one of the grandest of all the star cemeteries, surrounded by the monuments of the still remembered, and the crowds who come seeking the famous few walk right past the quiet grave of the gentle, haunted man who once stood among the biggest stars in the world. He deserves to be sought out and remembered, this quiet, wounded man who gave the screen some of its most enduring images and asked so little in return. He rests here now, the gentle gunfighter whose name the mountains no longer echo. Let us travel now far to the south, to a country churchyard in Carrollton, Georgia, to the grave of Susan Hayward, the fiery redhead who clawed her way to the very top of her profession. Hayward was one of the most formidable actresses of her generation, a Brooklyn girl of ferocious drive and smoldering intensity who fought her way up from bit parts to become a 5-time Academy Award nominee, finally winning the coveted prize for a shattering performance as a woman on death row. Audiences thrilled to her strength and her passion, and for years she was one of the most respected and highly paid stars in Hollywood. But her private life was stormy and often unhappy, and after a hard-won late happiness with her second husband, she was struck down by a brain tumor and died in 1975 at just 57. She chose to be buried far from Hollywood, in the small Georgia town she had come to love, beside the husband she adored. And there, in that quiet rural churchyard, the great star lies almost entirely unvisited. She had grown up poor and scrappy in Brooklyn, and she brought that unquenchable fighting spirit to everything she did, elbowing her way into a business that had no room for her and refusing, year after year, to be denied, until sheer talent and sheer will had made her one of the most admired dramatic actresses in the world. She specialized in playing survivors, women who suffered and endured and triumphed, and audiences felt the authenticity of it because they sensed, rightly, that she had lived it. Her long-sought Academy Award, for her ferocious portrayal of a condemned woman, was the crowning vindication of a career built on defiance. But the fire that drove her also burned her through turbulent romances and a suicide attempt in her darkest hour, before she found real happiness at last with the Southern husband who gave her peace. When the cancer came for her, she faced it with the same courage she had brought to every role, and when she was gone, she was laid to rest, at her own wish, far from the city that had made her, in the quiet red earth of Georgia, where almost no one now comes to find her. It is fitting, in its way, that so fierce and independent a spirit should lie not in Hollywood at all, but in a place of her own choosing, far from the industry she had conquered and then left behind, and yet there is a loneliness in that distant Georgia grave, seldom visited by the fans who once packed theaters to see her suffer and triumph on the screen. To remember her now is to remember not only a great actress, but a certain kind of woman, tough and wounded and unbreakable, who fought for everything she ever had, and asked no one for pity, and who deserves to be spoken of still. Speak her name then, and let it carry a little way across that quiet Georgia churchyard, back toward the town of dreams she conquered and left behind. She rests here now, the fighter who won her every battle but the last. Let us travel now to the Glenwood Cemetery in Houston, Texas, to the grave of Jean Tierney, whose luminous beauty made her one of the most photographed women in the world. Tierney was a vision, an actress of such exquisite loveliness that the camera seemed to fall in love with her, unforgettable as the haunting title character of a classic mystery, and terrifying as the obsessive beauty of a film that earned her an Academy Award nomination. In the 1940s and 50s, she was one of Hollywood's most glamorous and beloved leading ladies. But behind the perfect face was a woman in profound pain, for she suffered from a devastating mental illness that would derail her career and lead to years of hospitalization and unimaginable private tragedy, including the heartbreaking disability of her first child. She found some peace at last in her later years, in Texas, far from the cameras, and died there in 1991. And now, the luminous beauty who once graced 1,000 magazine covers lies quietly in Houston, her grave seldom visited. She had been born to wealth and privilege, a debutante of dazzling beauty who seemed to have been designed by nature for stardom. And when Hollywood discovered her, the camera confirmed what everyone could see, that here was one of the loveliest women ever to appear on a screen, with a face of such delicate perfection that directors built entire films around simply gazing at her. She was more than a beauty, though, a subtle and intelligent actress capable of real depth, chilling as a murderously possessive wife, and heartbreaking as the ghostly object of a detective's obsession. But her life was shadowed by a cruelty almost too painful to relate. For during her pregnancy, she contracted an illness from an infected fan who had broken quarantine to meet her, and her daughter was born with severe disabilities, a tragedy that haunted her forever and helped tip her into the mental illness that would consume years of her life in hospitals and treatments. She found a fragile peace at last, far from Hollywood, in Texas, and there she died and was buried, the luminous face that once sold 1,000 magazines now resting all but unvisited. Her story is a reminder that great beauty and great fame are no shield whatever against suffering, that the woman the whole world envied as the loveliest of creatures was carrying, behind that flawless face, a burden of grief and illness heavier than most of her admirers would ever know. She wrote of it herself, with rare honesty, in her later years, hoping to help others. She lies now in Texas, far from the studios that framed her beauty, and her extraordinary films are watched by fewer and fewer, so that the face that once stopped hearts rests in a quiet the world has imposed upon it. To remember her is to honor not the flawless image but the brave and suffering woman who lived behind it, and who bore more than her share of sorrow with quiet grace. She rests here now, the perfect face that hid a world of pain. Let us travel now across the country to the Westchester Hills Cemetery in New York, to the grave of John Garfield, the brooding star who helped invent a whole new kind of screen acting. Garfield was a revelation, a tough, sensitive, working-class kid from the streets of New York whose raw, naturalistic style broke completely with the polished manners of old Hollywood and paved the way for the great method actors who would follow, in electrifying performances as boxers and drifters and doomed romantic heroes. He was one of the most exciting stars of the 1940s and early 50s, adored by audiences who saw their own struggles in his wounded, defiant characters. But then came the dark days of the Hollywood blacklist, and Garfield, who refused to name names and inform on his friends, was hounded and harassed and driven from his career by the witch hunters, and in 1952, at just 39 years old, his heart broken and his health destroyed by the persecution, he died of a heart attack. He had grown up hard on the immigrant streets of New York, a troubled, angry boy saved by the theater, and he brought to the screen something audiences had never quite seen before, a raw, coiled, working-class intensity that made the polished stars around him suddenly look artificial, so that in a real sense he was the father of the revolution in screen acting that the great method actors would carry forward after him. He played fighters and outsiders and doomed lovers with a wounded ferocity that electrified audiences and made him a genuine star, beloved especially by ordinary people who saw their own hopes and struggles reflected in his defiant heroes. And he was, throughout his life, a man of fierce loyalty and conscience. And when the anti-communist witch hunters demanded that he save himself by informing on his friends and colleagues, he refused, and for that refusal he was destroyed, his name blackened, his work taken from him, hounded relentlessly by those who had made it their business to ruin him. The strain was more than his heart could bear, and it failed him at just 39. Many who loved him said plainly that the blacklist had killed him, as surely as any bullet. His grave lies in a Jewish cemetery in the New York suburbs, far from Hollywood, and there is a bitter appropriateness in that distance, for the town that had made him a star had also, through cowardice and fear, allowed him to be destroyed. In the decades since, history has largely vindicated him and condemned the witch hunt that killed him, and film scholars now honor him as a pioneer whose influence far outstripped his brief career. But the general public has forgotten him, and the ordinary people who once adored their working-class hero no longer come to lay flowers, so that the rebel who would not betray his friends lies in a silence he did nothing to deserve. Remember him, then, the brave and gifted man who chose his conscience over his career and paid for it with his life? He rests here now, the rebel whose heart the blacklist broke. Let us travel now to the Friends Cemetery, a quiet Quaker burial ground tucked inside a Brooklyn park, to the grave of Montgomery Clift, one of the most gifted and tormented actors who ever lived. Clift was a sensation, a young man of such delicate beauty and such extraordinary sensitivity that he became, alongside a very few others, the very model of the new, deeply felt style of screen acting, unforgettable in a string of classic films that earned him multiple Academy Award nominations and the adoration of millions. But he was a soul at war with himself, tormented by inner demons he could never name, and in the middle of his career, a catastrophic car accident shattered his beautiful face and left him in chronic pain, beginning what one observer called the longest suicide in Hollywood history, a slow decline through addiction and illness. He died in 1966 at just 45. And this luminous, haunted talent now lies beneath a simple, flat stone in an obscure Brooklyn graveyard that almost no one ever finds. He had arrived in Hollywood as something entirely new, a young man of such fine-boned beauty and such raw, trembling emotional honesty that he seemed to belong to a different and more sensitive species than the stars around him. And in film after film, he gave performances of shattering depth and vulnerability that earned him the reverence of audiences and fellow actors alike. And that opened the door for the whole generation of intense young method actors who idolized him. He was, for a few short years, at the very summit of his art and his fame, but he was tormented within, wrestling with private anguish and with a self he could not reconcile with the world he lived in, and the terrible car crash that destroyed his beautiful face midway through his career only accelerated a decline that had already begun, a long, slow unraveling through pain and pills and drink that a friend famously called the longest suicide in Hollywood history. When his exhausted heart at last gave out, he was only 45. And this most luminous and influential of talents was laid, at his family's wish, beneath a plain, flat marker in an obscure little Quaker cemetery hidden inside a Brooklyn park, where scarcely anyone ever comes. There is a heartbreaking irony in his obscure resting place, for few actors have ever been more influential or more revered by those who understand the craft, and yet the ordinary moviegoer has largely forgotten him, so that the man who helped remake American acting lies beneath a plain slab in a tiny graveyard most New Yorkers do not even know exists. Those who do make the pilgrimage speak of the strange peacefulness of the spot, the quiet trees, the simple stone, so at odds with the turbulence of the life it marks. To find him there, and to remember the luminous, suffering talent he was, is to feel the full ache of how the world lets its finest slip away. He deserves to be remembered not for the wreckage of his final years, but for the luminous gift that made him, for a few short seasons, the most exciting young actor alive. He rests here now, the beautiful, broken star in his hidden Brooklyn grave. Let us travel now to the Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood, to the grave of Gail Russell, a beauty of rare and delicate loveliness whose fear destroyed her. Russell had enormous dark eyes and an ethereal, otherworldly quality that made her unforgettable on screen, and she was plucked from obscurity as a teenager and made a star almost overnight, appearing in eerie hits and romances that showcased her fragile beauty. But she suffered from a crippling, paralyzing shyness and stage fright so severe that she could scarcely bear to face the cameras, and to calm her terror she began to drink, and the drinking became a slow and public tragedy that wrecked her career and her health. In 1961, at just 36 years old, she was found dead, alone, In her apartment, surrounded by empty bottles, a beauty destroyed by a fear the world never understood. She had never wanted to be a star at all, a painfully shy girl discovered almost by accident, whose extraordinary beauty, those enormous haunted eyes and that air of fragile innocence, made the decision for her, sweeping her up into a fame she was constitutionally unable to bear. On screen, that very fragility was magic, perfect for the ghostly, romantic, otherworldly roles that made her name. And for a time, she was one of her studio's most promising young stars. But the terror never left her. A stage fright so profound and so crippling that facing the camera became a daily agony. And in her desperation, she reached for alcohol to quiet the fear, and the alcohol became a monster that devoured her career, her marriage, and finally her life. All of it played out in the merciless glare of the gossip columns. She died young and alone, found in her apartment amid the wreckage of her illness. At just 36, a gentle soul, the machinery of fame, had simply ground to pieces. Few come now to the quiet suburban cemetery where she lies, and fewer still remember the frightened girl with the unforgettable eyes. Hers is perhaps the saddest kind of Hollywood story, not of talent squandered through arrogance, but of a gentle, unwilling soul simply crushed by a fame she never sought and could not withstand. A cautionary tale of the cruelty that can hide beneath the glamour. She had wanted one senses, only a quiet and ordinary life. And the machine that made her a star gave her instead an early and lonely death. She lies now in a suburban cemetery in the valley, and the enormous haunted eyes that once gazed out from 100 posters are remembered by almost no one, so that even in death the shyness she suffered from seems to cloak her grave in silence. Let us say her name gently, then, this shy and lovely soul, and grant her in memory the tenderness that the glare of fame never allowed her in life. She rests here now, the frightened beauty whom fame terrified to death. Let us travel now, far from Hollywood, to the Washington Heights Memorial Park in Ogden, Utah, to the grave of Robert Walker, a sensitive young star whose brief life ended in shocking tragedy. Walker was a gentle, boyish, appealing actor who won America's heart in wartime romances, playing the sweet, earnest young soldier better than anyone, before revealing astonishing depths as the charming, chilling villain of a legendary suspense film, a performance now regarded as one of the finest of its kind ever given. But his private life was agony, for the collapse of his marriage to a famous actress devastated him, and he spiraled into emotional breakdown and heavy drinking. In 1951, at just 32 years old, during a psychiatric episode at his home, a doctor administered a sedative, and Walker had a sudden and fatal reaction to it, dying with horrifying abruptness. He was carried home to Utah to be buried. He had a rare and appealing quality, a boyish sincerity and warmth that made audiences instinctively love and trust him. And in the years of the war, he became the perfect embodiment of the sweet, decent young American serviceman, breaking hearts in tender romances that spoke directly to a nation's longing and grief. Then, astonishingly, he shed that gentle image entirely to deliver one of the most chilling and brilliant villain performances in the history of the screen, a charming, insinuating, utterly amoral killer, revealing depths of talent that promised a long and extraordinary career. But his own life was coming apart, for the very public collapse of his marriage to a beloved young star had wounded him beyond healing, and he sank into breakdown and heavy drinking and repeated stays in psychiatric care. On a summer night in 1951, in the grip of an episode, he was given a sedative by a doctor who had helped him before. And this time, his body reacted catastrophically, and he was dead within minutes. At just 32, his stunned studio mourned him, and his family took him home to be buried far away, in Utah. There is a terrible poignancy in the swiftness of his end. A young man of enormous promise, having just proven he could play anything, extinguished in the space of a few minutes by a treatment meant to help him, his brilliant career barely begun. Had he lived, many believe, he might have become one of the great actors of his age. Instead, he lies far from Hollywood. In the Utah earth, his sweet wartime romances and his one chilling masterpiece of villainy watched now by only a few, his name meaning little to a world that has moved on. To speak it here, and to remember the gentle, gifted, troubled young man behind it, is to grant him a little of the memory that time has denied him. Speak his name kindly then, And remember the promise that flickered so brightly and was snuffed out so cruelly and so soon. He rests here now, the gentle young star gone in a heartbeat. Let us travel now to the Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth, California, to the grave of Gloria Grahame, the sultry, offbeat beauty who was one of the great faces of film noir. Grahame was like no one else, a uniquely alluring actress with a wounded, sensual quality and a slightly crooked smile that made her perfect for the shadowy world of crime films, where she played bad girls and heartbreakers with unforgettable flair, winning an Academy Award and lighting up a string of classics. But her career was hampered by her reputation for being difficult, and by a personal life of extraordinary scandal that shocked even Hollywood, and by the 1960s the once celebrated star had slipped into obscurity, working in small theaters far from the spotlight. She died of cancer in 1981, at 57, having concealed her illness to the very end so she could keep working. And now, the great noir siren lies almost forgotten. There was something genuinely original about her, an offbeat, wounded sensuality unlike any other actress of her time, and it made her the perfect inhabitant of the dark and rain-slicked world of film noir, where she played faithless wives and gangsters, moles, and heartbreakers with a knowing, damaged allure that lingered in the mind long after the lights came up. Her talent was real and widely recognized, crowned by an Academy Award, and for a while she moved among the finest films and filmmakers of her day. But she carried a reputation for being difficult on set, and, far more damaging, her private life erupted into a scandal so shocking, involving the tangled and forbidden relationships of her several marriages, that Hollywood recoiled, and the once celebrated actress found the good roles drying up and the doors closing. She spent her later years in near obscurity, working gamely in small regional theaters, and when cancer came, she hid it and kept performing almost to the end, dying at 57 with her courage intact and her fame long gone. The shadows she had haunted on screen seemed, in the end, to swallow her whole. Hers was a talent too distinctive to be replaced, and a reputation too damaged to be rescued, and the combination doomed her to a long twilight of obscurity that has only deepened since her death, so that the Academy Award winner who once lit up the screen is now known only to devoted lovers of the old dark films. She lies in a modest cemetery in the valley, far from the grand mausoleums of the still celebrated, and the wounded, knowing beauty who haunted so many noir classics, now haunts only the memories of the few who still seek out her pictures. To remember her is to remember an original, a woman who was like no one else, and who deserved a kinder ending than the shadows gave her. Seek out her pictures then, and remember the wounded, knowing original who lit the darkness of the noir world as no one else quite could. She rests here now, the crooked-smiled siren, the shadows swallowed up. Let us travel now to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, to the grave of Dan Duryea, the actor audiences loved to hate. Duryea built one of the most distinctive careers in Hollywood by playing villains, and no one played them better, for he brought a sneering, cowardly, weaselly charm to his bad guys that was so wonderfully entertaining that audiences flocked to see him get his comeuppance film after film, making him a beloved and instantly recognizable presence throughout the 1940s and 50s. In real life, he was, by all accounts, the gentlest and most devoted of family men, the very opposite of the scoundrels he played, and he was cherished by everyone who knew him. He worked steadily until cancer took him in 1968. But the character actor, however beloved in his day, is always the first to be forgotten, and the great screen villain now lies in a quiet grave that his old fans have long since ceased to visit. He had one of the most unusual and enviable careers in Hollywood, for he made himself indispensable and beloved not by playing heroes but by playing the most delightful scoundrels the screen had ever seen, cowardly, sneering, oily little villains so vividly and entertainingly wicked that audiences positively looked forward to watching them get their just desserts. He was a master of the craft, and he worked constantly, a fixture of the crime, films, and westerns of 2 full decades, his weaselly grin instantly recognizable to millions. And the great private joke of his life was that he was, in reality, nothing whatsoever like the men he played, but rather one of the kindest, most gentle, and most devoted husbands and fathers in all of Hollywood. A quiet family man who went home each night from a day of villainy to tend his garden and cherish his sons. He acted right up until the cancer took him. But the fate of the character actor is to be forgotten first, however cherished in his prime. and the great villain now lies in a quiet grave where no one comes any longer to boo or to cheer. His is the quiet tragedy of the great supporting player, the indispensable craftsman who makes the stars look good and the pictures come alive, and is then forgotten the moment the spotlight moves on, though he gave audiences more pure pleasure than many a leading man. He lies in one of the great Hollywood cemeteries, among the character actors and the almost forgotten, and the sneering grin that once delighted millions is stilled now, unremembered. To recall him is to recall a whole vanished art, the art of the perfect screen villain, and to smile again at the memory of a gentle man who spent his life being wonderfully, delightfully wicked for our entertainment. Remember him with a smile then, the gentle family man who spent his working life being so gloriously, entertainingly bad. He rests here now, the lovable villain no one comes to boo anymore. Let us travel now to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, to the grave of Clifton Webb, the waspish, elegant star who was one of the wittiest presences the screen ever knew. Webb was a singular figure, a sophisticated, acid-tongued actor who came to films relatively late and became an unlikely major star, unforgettable as the venomous columnist of a classic mystery and as the fussy, brilliant babysitter of a beloved comedy that made him a top box office draw, earning 3 Academy Award nominations for his impeccable, cutting performances. He was the height of urbane elegance, adored for his wit. He died in 1966, utterly devoted to the memory of his mother, with whom he had lived his entire life, and it is said that his grief-stricken spirit lingers still in the mausoleum where he rests. But the elegant wit who once had all of Hollywood laughing is now scarcely remembered at all. He had come to the movies late, after a long career on the stage, an already middle-aged man of impeccable sophistication who seemed an unlikely candidate for film stardom, and yet he became, almost overnight, one of the most distinctive and delicious presences on the screen, a master of the withering put-down and the raised eyebrow whose acid elegance was unlike anything else in Hollywood. Whether as a poisonous, brilliant newspaper columnist or as the impossibly superior genius who condescended to babysit an unruly household to hilarious effect, he was a scene-stealer of the first order, earning multiple Academy Award nominations and a devoted following. Off-screen, he was famous for his devotion to his mother, with whom he lived until her death, a loss so shattering that a friend quipped he had become the world's oldest orphan. He never fully recovered, and he died a few years after her. And legend holds that his elegant ghost still haunts the halls of the mausoleum where he lies. But the peerless wit who once convulsed the nation now rests in a silence broken by almost no one. His waspish elegance was so much a creature of its particular moment, the sophisticated mid-century world of drawing rooms and cutting repartee, that it perhaps could not survive the changing of the times, and the changing times have swept him almost entirely from memory, so that the peerless sophisticate who earned 3 Academy Award nominations is now a stranger to all but the connoisseur. He lies in the storied Hollywood cemetery, and whether or not his restless ghost truly walks there, as the legends insist, the living rarely come to disturb it. To remember him is to remember a vanished style of wit, sharp and glittering and unkind, that the screen has never quite matched since. Remember him then, and the glittering, merciless wit that once had a whole nation helpless with laughter and admiration. He rests here now, the elegant wit whose barbs no longer sting a soul. Let us travel now to the Glen Haven Memorial Park in Sylmar, to the grave of Vera Ellen, one of the most gifted dancers ever to grace a Hollywood musical. Vera Ellen was a marvel, a dancer of such precision, grace, and dazzling energy that she held her own beside the very greatest, partnering the legendary Hoofers of the age in a string of beloved musicals, most immortally in a Christmas classic that families still watch together every single year, never guessing at the sorrow of the woman on the screen. For behind the radiant smile she was fragile and troubled, struggling with her weight and with a crippling perfectionism that some believe developed into an eating disorder. And as the great age of the movie musical ended, she withdrew almost completely from the world, becoming a recluse and vanishing from public view long before her death in 1981. And now the brilliant dancer lies in a grave as quiet as her final years. She was, by the reckoning of many who know the art, one of the finest dancers ever to work in the movies, a performer of such astonishing technical precision and such buoyant, joyful energy that she could partner the 2 greatest male dancers of the age and never once be overshadowed, holding her own step for dazzling step in some of the most beloved musicals ever filmed. Millions have watched her dance, year upon year, in the beloved holiday film that has become a Christmas ritual for countless families, never suspecting the sadness of the woman behind the radiant smile. For she was fragile and troubled, a perfectionist tormented by anxieties about her body and her weight that some believe hardened into a devastating eating disorder, and as the golden age of the musical faded and the work dried up, she retreated further and further from the world, until she had become a near total recluse, hidden away and almost forgotten while she was still alive. She died in 1981, and the brilliant dancer who had shared the screen with legends slipped into a grave as quiet and hidden as her final, lonely years. There is a peculiar sorrow in the forgetting of a dancer, whose art is motion and life and joy itself, and who is remembered, if at all, only in the fixed amber of old film, so that this radiant, leaping talent now lies utterly still in a quiet valley cemetery, her brilliance preserved only in the musicals that fewer and fewer sit down to watch. Millions still see her dance each Christmas without ever learning her name or guessing her sorrow. To speak that name now, and to remember the joyful, troubled genius who moved so beautifully and suffered so quietly, is to return a little of the recognition that her painful final decades so cruelly withheld. Watch her dance then, this Christmas and every Christmas, and remember the joyful, troubled genius whose feat knew no equal. She rests here now, the dancing star who slipped quietly into the shadows. Let us travel now to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, to the grave of Suzanne Ball, a rising young starlet whose story is among the most heartbreaking of all. Ball was a beautiful and promising young actress, a cousin of one of the most famous women in television, and she seemed to have a golden future before her, freshly signed to a studio and being groomed for stardom in colorful adventures. But fate dealt her a cruel and unimaginable hand, for a fall on a film set led to the discovery of a cancer in her leg, and despite the amputation of the limb in a desperate attempt to save her, the disease spread, and this brave young woman, who married her sweetheart and kept working and smiling through unimaginable suffering, died in 1955 at just 22 years old. Her courage moved all who knew her, but her career was too brief to be remembered, and now she lies all but forgotten. She had been a band singer and a model before Hollywood signed her, a fresh and radiant young woman with dark hair and a warm smile, and the priceless advantage of a famous family connection, and the studio saw a real future in her, casting her in vivid adventures and grooming her carefully for the stardom that seemed certain to come. She had everything before her, and then, with a suddenness that still seems unbearably cruel, it was all taken away. For a stumble on a film set led doctors to discover a rare and aggressive cancer growing in her leg, and though they took the leg in a desperate effort to halt it, the disease had already spread beyond their reach. What followed was a display of courage that awed everyone who witnessed it. For the young woman married the man she loved, learned to move on an artificial limb, and even returned to work, smiling through agony, determined to live fully whatever time she had left. She died at just 22. Her bravery was celebrated then, but her career had been too brief to leave a lasting mark, and today she lies in one of Hollywood's grandest cemeteries, entirely unknown to the crowds who pass her by. Hers is a grave to break the hardest heart, for she was scarcely more than a girl, robbed of the long and shining life that seemed so certainly hers, and her brief, brave struggle, born with a courage far beyond her years, was witnessed and admired, and then, as the years passed and her handful of films slipped from memory, quietly forgotten, she lies in one of Hollywood's grandest cemeteries, unknown to nearly all who pass, a beautiful young woman who never got the chance to become the star she might have been. To remember her now is the least that we can do, to speak her name and honor the golden future that was stolen from her, and the grace with which she bore the theft. Say her name then, softly, and mourn the long, bright life that was promised her and so cruelly withheld. She rests here now, the brave young starlet whose golden future never came. And so we come to the final grave of this first part of our journey, the resting place of a glamour girl whose very nickname promised the world. Let us travel to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, to the grave of Marie McDonald, an actress once so celebrated for her figure that the whole world knew her simply as the Body. McDonald was a stunning beauty, a model-turned actress who became one of the most photographed glamour girls of the 1940s and 50s, her dazzling looks making her a favorite of the magazines and the gossip columns, her name a byword for Hollywood allure. But her life off-screen was a chaos of turbulent marriages, one after another, of scandals and breakdowns, and a bizarre and still mysterious kidnapping ordeal, and the turmoil overwhelmed the promise of her career. In 1965, at just 42 years old, worn down by years of struggle, she died of an overdose, and the dazzling glamour girl was gone. And now the body, once known to all the world, lies in a grave that the world no longer remembers. She had been born poor in Kentucky and had reinvented herself utterly, clawing her way from beauty pageants and modeling to the fringes of Hollywood glamour, and for a while the reinvention worked spectacularly. Her astonishing figure and her genius for publicity, making her one of the most photographed women in America, even if the great roles never quite matched the great fame. She was, in a sense, famous, chiefly for being famous, a glamour girl of the old school whose image outran her filmography. But the private woman behind the pinup was fragile and unhappy, lurching from one disastrous marriage to the next, 7 of them in all, and from one crisis to the next, including a strange and headline-grabbing kidnapping ordeal that was never fully explained, and that many suspected was a desperate publicity stunt gone wrong. The turbulence wore her down, body and soul, until she could bear no more. There is a special poignancy in the forgetting of a woman who wanted, above all things, to be adored and remembered, and who spent her whole life chasing a fame that has now dissolved so completely that her once famous nickname means nothing to anyone. She lies in one of the great cemeteries of Los Angeles, and the dazzling glamour girl the whole world once knew by a single word now rests in an anonymity she would have found unbearable. To speak her name here is to grant her, for a moment, the remembrance she craved. Say her name then, and grant her for a moment the adoration she chased so desperately and lost so completely. She rests here now, the glamour girl whose famous name the world has quite forgotten. And so, friends, we pause a moment among these first 15. We have stood tonight at the graves of idols and beauties, singers and dancers, villains and rebels, every one of them once adored beyond measure, and every one of them now left in a silence that would have seemed impossible in their golden prime. There is no scandal in it, and no villain to blame, only the quiet, relentless working of time and forgetting, which comes for the famous and the humble alike, and which teaches us, if we let it, to hold both our heroes and our own brief days a little more gently. 15 more of these forgotten stars are waiting for us a little further along the road. In the great cemeteries of the City of Dreams, and in quiet plots far beyond it, each with a face that once launched 1,000 magazine covers and a grave that no one visits now. Think, as you rest, of what it must be to be so wholly adored and then so wholly forgotten within the span of a single life. To hear the roar of the crowd fade year by year into silence, to watch the fan letters dwindle and the offers cease, and the young faces on the street show no flicker of recognition at all. Some of these stars lived to feel that forgetting settled over them like a slow snow, and it broke their hearts as surely as any illness. Others were spared that particular sorrow only by dying young, at the height of their fame, never knowing how completely the world would move on. Either way, the forgetting came, and it is the common fate that binds all 15 of the souls we have visited tonight, and the 15 who still await us. But forgetting is not quite the same as gone, for so long as a single voice speaks these names with warmth, so long as a single traveler pauses at these quiet graves to remember, the stars are not entirely dark. That is the small and stubborn work of a night like this one. So rest here a moment, and hold them kindly in your heart, and when you are ready, we shall walk on together, and go on remembering the ones the world forgot. So rest here a moment, and hold them kindly in your heart, and when you are ready, we shall walk on together, and go on remembering the ones the world forgot. Let us travel now to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, in the very heart of the town that made and forgot her. Let us travel now to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, in the very heart of the town that made and forgot her, to the grave of Ann Sheridan. Once one of the sauciest and most beloved stars on the Warner Brothers lot, Sheridan was a sensation. A warm, witty, red-headed Texas girl with a knowing smile and a genuine gift for both comedy and drama, and the studio's publicity machine crowned her the Oomph Girl, a nickname that made her a household name and a favorite pinup of a generation of soldiers. But she was far more than a pretty face. a skilled and versatile actress who held her own opposite the biggest leading men of the day in a string of hits. For years, she was one of Warner's most valuable stars, but the roles thinned as she aged, as they always did for women in that cruel business, and she was working in television when cancer took her in 1967 at just 51. And now, the vivacious star, whose very name once meant glamour and fun, lies here in the old Hollywood cemetery, her grave passed by crowds who have never heard of her. She had come up the hard way, a beauty contest winner from Texas, who fought her way through years of tiny roles before her warmth and her wit, and that indefinable quality the publicist labeled with a silly made-up word finally made her a star. And she always kept a clear-eyed, self-deprecating humor about the whole business, never taking her own glamour too seriously. Audiences loved her precisely because she seemed real, a good sport, a woman you could imagine actually knowing, and she brought that quality to comedies and dramas alike. More than holding her own beside the toughest and most celebrated leading men on the lot, she weathered the ups and downs of a long career with grace, and found real love late in life. It was cruel then that cancer should take her so relatively young, just as she had found happiness, and crueler still that the vivacious spark that had delighted a generation should be so completely forgotten so soon after it went out. There is a particular cruelty, too, in the way a manufactured nickname can outlive and even eclipse the real woman behind it, so that she is remembered now, when she is remembered at all, less as the fine and versatile actress she was than as a silly promotional slogan from a vanished age. She deserved far better than that, and she knew it, and she bore the whole circus with a wry good humor that only makes her forgetting the more poignant. To stand at her grave in the old Hollywood cemetery, amid the mausoleums of the still famous, and to speak her name with real respect, is to give her back a little of the dignity that the publicity machine and the passing years together stripped away. Speak her name, then, with the warmth she brought to every room she entered, and let the oomph girl be, for a moment, a real and remembered woman once again. She rests here now, the oomph girl whose spark the world has let go cold. Let us travel now to the Valley Oaks Memorial Park in Westlake Village, to the grave of Virginia Mayo, a golden beauty who was once the biggest box office draw at her studio. Mayo was a vision of blonde loveliness, so striking that a visiting sultan reportedly declared her living proof of the existence of God, and Hollywood put that beauty to dazzling use, pairing her with a beloved comedian in a string of Technicolor hits and casting her opposite the greatest tough guys of the era in unforgettable dramas. In the years after the war, she was Warner Brothers' single most bankable attraction. Her name above the title, her face on every magazine. But tastes changed. The great studio system that had made her began to crumble, and the parts grew smaller and rarer until they stopped coming altogether. She lived a long life, largely out of the spotlight, and died in 2005. And now the woman once called the most beautiful in the world lies in a quiet suburban cemetery, her films half forgotten, her grave seldom visited. She had trained as a dancer before the movies found her, and there was always a grace and a poise to her that the camera adored. But it was her extraordinary beauty, that flawless golden loveliness, that the studio prized above all and built its fortunes upon, casting her again and again as the radiant object of desire at the center of its biggest pictures. She was a better actress than she was often given credit for, sharp in comedy and genuinely affecting in drama, but the roles rarely asked much of her beyond that she be dazzling, and dazzling she reliably was. When the studio system collapsed and the appetite for her particular brand of Technicolor glamour faded, she found, like so many of her generation, that there was simply no place left for her, and she withdrew into a long, quiet private life. That the woman once seriously described as the most beautiful in the world should now lie in a modest suburban grave, unvisited and unremembered, is a lesson in the cruel arithmetic of fame. It is worth remembering, as we stand here, that fame built entirely upon beauty is the most perishable fame of all. For beauty fades, and the camera turns to younger faces, and the very quality that made a star can leave her, in the end, with nothing to hold the world's attention. She had more than beauty, in truth, but the industry rarely let her show it, and so the deeper gifts went largely unrecorded, and the loveliness that was celebrated could not, by its nature, endure. Her quiet grave in the valley is a monument to that hard truth. and to speak her name here is to insist that she was a person and an artist, and not merely the most beautiful face of a season long past. Seek out her pictures, then, and see for yourself the loveliness that a whole world once agreed was almost beyond belief, and remember the woman it belonged to. She rests here now, the golden beauty, the passing years dimmed and forgot. Let us travel now to the Santa Barbara Cemetery, overlooking the Pacific, to the grave of Jeanne Crane, one of the most popular leading ladies of the 1940s and 50s. Crane was the very picture of fresh, wholesome American beauty, a former beauty queen whose radiant loveliness and gentle charm made her one of the top stars at her studio, beloved by audiences in a string of warm romances and musicals, and capable, too, of real dramatic depth, earning an Academy Award nomination for a brave and important film about racial identity. For a decade, she was a genuine star, her face as familiar as any in America, but her career faded as she moved into middle age, and she devoted herself to her large family, raising 7 children far from the glare of Hollywood. She died in 2003 and was laid to rest here above the sea in Santa Barbara. And now, the wholesome beauty who once graced 100 magazine covers rests in a grave that her old admirers have long since ceased to seek. She had been a beauty queen and a skilled ice skater before the movies claimed her, and the studio saw in her fresh, dark-eyed loveliness the perfect embodiment of a certain American ideal, the sweet, wholesome, decent girl that a nation at war and then at peace longed to believe in, and it made her one of its most reliable and beloved stars on exactly those terms. But she chafed at times against the wholesome image, and she proved, when given the chance, that she could reach for something deeper and braver, most notably in a groundbreaking film that tackled the painful subject of race with a seriousness rare for its day and earned her the industry's highest recognition. Still, it was as the girl next door that audiences cherished her, and when that kind of role dried up, she turned, without evident regret, to the raising of her 7 children. She died overlooking the sea she had retired beside, and the wholesome beauty who once seemed to embody the nation's dreams is now a stranger even to the film lovers who pass her grave. There is a gentle irony in her fate, for of all the stars we visit on this walk, she was perhaps the one who cared least about lasting fame, who seemed genuinely content to trade the spotlight for a house full of children and the ordinary joys of family life, so that her forgetting, unlike that of some, may have troubled her not at all. And yet it troubles us, who stand at her grave above the sea, and remember what a fixture she once was in the dreams of a nation, and it seems only right to honor the warmth and the decency she brought to the screen, and the quiet wisdom of a woman who knew that there were things worth more than stardom. Remember her, then, above her quiet sea, the wholesome beauty who gave a troubled age something gentle to believe in, and asked so little in return. She rests here now, the girl next door a whole nation has forgotten. Let us travel now far from Hollywood, to a cemetery in Austin, Texas, to the grave of Zachary Scott, the suave and sinister actor who made a specialty of elegant villainy. Scott was a distinctive and memorable presence, a Texan with a pencil mustache and an air of continental sophistication that made him perfect for playing cads, schemers, and mystery men, and he made an unforgettable impression as the caddish seducer in a classic melodrama that won its leading lady an Academy Award. For a decade, he brought his silky menace to film after film, a reliable and recognizable star of the 1940s and 50s. But his Hollywood career faded, and he returned at last to his native Texas, where, in 1965, a brain tumor took his life at just 51. He was buried there in Austin, far from the studios where he had once smoldered on the screen. And now the elegant villain who once made audiences shiver lies all but forgotten in the Texas earth. He had come to acting by an unusual road, a doctor's son who abandoned his medical studies to work his passage to England on a freighter and learn his craft in the repertory theaters there, and he brought to Hollywood a polish and a worldliness that set him apart, a cultivated, slightly dangerous elegance that directors quickly learned to exploit. He was rarely the hero, for his gifts ran to something more interesting: the charming rotter, the smiling betrayer, the man whose fine manners concealed a rotten heart, and he played such roles with a relish and a skill that made him one of the most memorable supporting villains of his day. But the character man's fame is a fragile thing, and as the years passed and the parts grew fewer, he drifted back to the Texas he had come from, only to be struck down there by illness at just past 50. He lies now in Austin, in the state that bred him, and the silky elegance that once made audiences shiver with delicious unease is remembered by scarcely anyone at all. It is the recurring tragedy of the character actor, and of the specialist in villainy above all, that the very skill that makes him indispensable also makes him invisible, for the audience remembers the story and the star and the delicious shiver of the villain's comeuppance, but rarely troubles to learn the name of the fine actor who provided it. He gave the movies years of elegant, memorable menace, and asked in return only steady work. And he received in the end the character man's usual reward, which is to be entirely forgotten. He lies now in the Texas earth that produced him, far from the shadowy soundstages where he practiced his silky art, and it falls to us, passing this way, to speak his name, and remember the cultivated menace he brought so expertly to the screen. Remember him, then, the doctor's son who crossed an ocean to learn his craft, and gave the movies years of elegant, unforgettable villainy. He rests here now, the silky schemer whose menace no longer troubles a soul. Let us travel now to a cemetery in Monterey, California, to the grave of Steve Cochran, a rugged and darkly handsome leading man whose life ended in one of the strangest tragedies in Hollywood history. Cochran was a powerfully built, magnetic actor who specialized in playing tough guys, gangsters, and dangerous heels, memorably menacing the greatest stars of the era, and off-screen he was as notorious a ladies' man as the movies ever produced, his romances filling the gossip columns. For years he was a familiar and virile presence on the screen. But in 1965, at just 48, came the bizarre and grisly end, for he had sailed his yacht into the Pacific with a small crew of inexperienced young women, and when he died suddenly of an infection at sea, the terrified crew, unable to operate the vessel, drifted helplessly for days with his body aboard before the boat washed up on a foreign shore. He was brought home to California to be buried, and now the rugged star and his strange, sad death are remembered by almost no one. He had knocked around at a dozen rough trades, cowpuncher and railroad hand among them, before an impulsive dash to Hollywood and a lucky break on the stage set him on the road to stardom, and something of that hard, restless, untamed quality always clung to him on screen, making him utterly convincing as the brutal, swaggering heavies he so often played. Off-screen, he lived exactly as recklessly as the men he portrayed, a hard-drinking, hard-loving adventurer whose tangled romances and volatile temper kept him forever in the scandal sheets, and who seemed constitutionally incapable of the caution that might have lengthened his life or his career. His death was the stuff of grim legend, a sudden illness at sea aboard his own yacht, and the horror of those days as his inexperienced companions drifted helplessly on the open ocean with his body, unable to bring the boat to shore, reads like something from one of his own dark pictures. He was brought home to California at the last, and the wild, doomed star is now remembered by almost no one but the most devoted students of the old films. His bizarre and lurid death, which filled the newspapers for a lurid week or two, might have been expected to secure him at least a footnote in Hollywood's long chronicle of strange endings. And yet even that grim notoriety has faded, so that the man and his macabre final voyage alike have slipped almost entirely from memory. There is something fitting, if bleak, in the image of that rudderless boat drifting on the empty sea with its dead captain aboard, for it stands as a kind of grim emblem of a career and a life that had themselves lost their bearings. He lies now in California, brought back at last to solid ground, and the rugged, reckless star, who once menaced the screen's greatest names, is remembered by scarcely a soul. Remember him, then, the wild and reckless star whose life burned as hot and ended as strangely as any the movies ever produced. He rests here now, the tough guy whose final voyage drifted into oblivion. Let us travel now to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cathedral City, near Palm Springs, to the grave of Guy Madison, a strikingly handsome young man who became one of the great heartthrobs of the era. Madison was discovered, the story goes, when a talent scout spotted him in uniform, and his boyish good looks caused such a sensation in even a tiny early role that the studio was flooded with fan mail, launching him to stardom almost overnight. He became a beloved matinee idol and then, on television, an icon to a generation of children as the star of a hugely popular Western series. For a time, he was one of the most recognizable faces in America. He had also been, for a few troubled years, the husband of the tragic beauty Gail Russell, whom we visited earlier on our walk. the two lovely, doomed young stars bound together for a while before her sorrows overwhelmed them. Madison lived until 1996. And now, the great heartthrob rests in the desert, his fame long faded. His was a Hollywood fairy tale of the old-fashioned kind, a young serviceman with a face and a physique so extraordinary that a single fleeting appearance on screen set off a frenzy of fan mail unlike anything the studio had seen. And overnight, with scarcely any acting experience at all, he was a star, groomed and polished and promoted into a genuine idol of the Bobby Soxers. He worked hard to justify the fame that had been thrust upon him, and he found his most lasting success on the new medium of television, where his handsome Western hero became a beloved fixture in the homes and hearts of a whole generation of children. But when that success ended, so, largely, did his fame, and he spent his later years making films abroad and then living quietly out of the spotlight. That he and the tragic young actress he had briefly married now lie in separate graves, both of them once so beautiful and so adored, both now so utterly forgotten, is among the quieter heartbreaks of our long walk. His story holds up a mirror to the whole strange machinery of stardom, for he was, in a sense, a manufactured star, plucked from obscurity, not for any demonstrated talent, but purely for the electric effect of his face and form upon a swooning public, and packaged and sold as an idol before he had learned his craft at all. That he worked so diligently to become a real and capable actor speaks well of him, and that he found genuine, lasting affection as a children's television hero is no small thing. But manufactured fame is fragile fame, and when the machine moved on to newer faces, his own was quickly forgotten. He lies now in the desert beside so many others of his vanished era, the great heartthrob of a season, unremembered by the grandchildren of the girls who once screamed his name. Remember him, then. The boy whose face alone once set a nation's heart racing, and the man who worked so hard to deserve the fame that found him. He rests here now, the matinee idol the swooning crowds no longer remember. Let us travel now, elsewhere in that same desert cemetery in Cathedral City, to the grave of George Montgomery, a handsome leading man who was also a true Renaissance figure. Montgomery was a ruggedly good-looking star of westerns and adventures, a former boxer of Montana ranch stock whose athletic appeal made him a favorite of audiences through the 1940s and 50s, and a familiar romantic lead opposite many of the era's loveliest actresses. But he was far more than a handsome face, for he was a genuinely gifted artist and craftsman, a sculptor and a maker of fine furniture whose beautiful handmade pieces earned him real and lasting respect, entirely apart from his acting. He was, for a time, married to one of the most beloved singers in America. He lived a full and creative life until the year 2000, and now the handsome cowboy artist rests in the desert he loved, his films seldom watched, his grave seldom sought. He had grown up the son of immigrants on a Montana ranch, one of a great brood of children, and he brought to Hollywood the genuine physical prowess of a working cowboy and a former prizefighter, which made him utterly believable in the westerns and adventure films that became his stock in trade throughout 2 busy decades. But what set him apart from the ranks of handsome leading men was what he did away from the camera. For he was a true and dedicated artist in wood and stone and metal, a sculptor and a designer and a builder of exquisite handcrafted furniture, work of such genuine quality that it won him a serious reputation entirely separate from the movies, and that he clearly valued as much as or more than his acting. His marriage to a beloved singing star kept him in the public eye, but it is his beautiful handmade creations that may prove his most lasting legacy. He lived a long and productive life, and lies now in the desert, both his screen career and his fine craftsmanship largely forgotten by a world that has moved on. There is a quiet lesson in his double career, in a man who was celebrated for the fleeting and superficial gift of a handsome face and a commanding screen presence, while pouring his deepest devotion into the slow, patient, honest craft of making beautiful things with his hands, objects of real and lasting worth that would outlive any film. It is those handmade pieces, perhaps, and not the forgotten movies, that are his truest monument, scattered now in homes and collections, quietly outlasting the fame that once defined him. He lies in the desert he came to love, and though both the movie cowboy and the master craftsman have largely faded from public memory, there is a kind of dignity in his story, the story of a man who always knew that the work of the hands endures, when the glamour of the screen has blown away like dust. Remember him then, for the beautiful things his hands made as much as for the films, the quiet artist behind the movie Cowboy. He rests here now, the cowboy craftsman, whose two great gifts the world forgot. Let us travel now back toward the city, to the Glen Haven Memorial Park in Sylmar, at the end of a long and winding road, to the grave of Ella Raines, a sultry brunette beauty who blazed briefly and brightly across the screen. Raines had a smoldering, intelligent allure that made her a natural for the shadowy world of film noir, and in the middle years of the 1940s, she rose with astonishing speed to real stardom, unforgettable as the resourceful heroine of a classic mystery and as the loyal love interest in a string of atmospheric thrillers. For a few years, she seemed poised for a long and major career, but her stardom faded almost as quickly as it had come, the good roles drying up as the decade turned, and she drifted into television and then into private life, leaving Hollywood behind. She died in 1988 and was laid to rest here in a quiet cemetery at the edge of the valley. And now, the smoldering noir beauty who once lit up the screen is remembered by almost no one at all. Her rise had been meteoric, one of those dazzling Hollywood ascents that seem, in the telling, almost too swift to be real, as she went in the space of a year or two from complete unknown to the leading lady of major productions, her smoky, intelligent beauty and her cool poise, making her a natural for the fatalistic dramas that were then coming into fashion. For a few years, she seemed certain to become one of the era's enduring stars, and she gave several performances that noir devotees still treasure. But something in the alchemy of stardom failed to hold. The very biggest roles went to others, and her moment passed with a swiftness that matched her rise, so that by the early 1950s, she had largely faded from the screen. She lived on quietly for decades, her brief blaze of fame long behind her, and she died in relative obscurity, laid to rest in a hard-to-find cemetery at the end of a winding road. The smoldering beauty who once seemed destined for lasting fame is now known only to the most devoted lovers of the shadowy films she graced. Hers is the cautionary tale of the meteor, the star whose very swiftness of rising seemed to guarantee an equally swift fall, and it raises the poignant question of why some talents catch and hold while others, seemingly just as gifted and just as lovely, flare brilliantly and then gutter out, remembered only by the devoted few. She did nothing wrong, committed no scandal, lost no talent, and yet the great career that seemed so certain simply failed to materialize, the roles drifting to others, the moment passing, the shadows she had haunted so beautifully closing over her at last. She lies now at the end of a winding road in a quiet valley cemetery, and the smoldering, intelligent beauty, who once seemed destined for lasting stardom, is a name known only to those who love the old dark films enough to seek her out. Seek her out, then, in the old dark films that still preserve her smoldering beauty, and remember the meteor who blazed so briefly and so bright. She rests here now, the noir siren whose brief blaze the shadows swallowed. Let us travel now to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, to the grave of Marjorie Main, one of the most beloved character actresses in the history of the movies. Main was a national treasure, a gruff, loud, gloriously unglamorous comedienne with a voice like a rusty gate and a heart of gold, who stole every scene she appeared in and became, improbably, a genuine box office star in her own right as the indomitable Ma Kettle, the frontier matriarch of a wildly popular series of country comedies that filled theaters for a decade. Audiences adored her earthy warmth and her impeccable comic timing, and she worked steadily for decades as one of Hollywood's most dependable and cherished players. She died in 1975. But the character player, however beloved, is always forgotten first, and the great comedienne who once made all of America laugh now lies in a grave that her old fans no longer visit. She had spent long years as a respected, dramatic character actress, playing hard-bitten mothers and grim frontier women, before a supporting role as a folksy farm wife struck such a chord with audiences that it was spun off into a whole series of films built around her. And in her late 50s, an age when most actresses found the work drying up, she became, astonishingly, a bona fide box office star, headlining one of the most profitable comedy franchises of its day. There was nothing glamorous about her, and that was precisely the point, for audiences adored her earthy, cackling, no-nonsense warmth, the sense that beneath the bluster was a woman of enormous heart, and she played the part to perfection through film after film. She was, by all accounts, a shy and private woman off-screen, quite unlike her raucous public image. She worked until her health failed and died in the mid-1970s, and the beloved comedian who once outdrew the glamorous leading ladies now lies in a grave that draws no visitors at all. Her career is a heartening reminder, in the midst of so much youth and beauty forgotten, that talent and heart can triumph over glamour, for she became a major star not despite but because of her utter lack of conventional beauty, winning the love of millions purely through her comic genius and her warmth. And yet even that kind of fame, so hard-won and so richly deserved, proves no more durable than any other. And the beloved comedienne, who once outdrew the glamour queens, now lies as forgotten as they do. There is a special poignancy in the forgetting of one who made so many people laugh. For laughter feels like it should leave a more lasting mark, and to speak her name here, and to smile at the memory of her cackling, big-hearted frontier matriarch, is to keep a little of that laughter alive. Remember her then, with a smile, the big-hearted, cackling original who proved that heart and humor could outshine any glamour. She rests here now, the beloved Ma Kettle whose laughter has faded to silence. Let us travel now to the Golden Gate National Cemetery, south of San Francisco, to the grave of Percy Kilbride, the gentle character actor forever remembered, when he is remembered at all, as the perfect partner to Marjorie Main. Kilbride was a comic artist of exquisite subtlety, a master of the slow burn and the deadpan delivery, and his portrayal of the lazy, slow-talking, endlessly exasperating Pa Kettle, the perfect foil to Main's blustering Ma, made the pair one of the most beloved comedy teams of the era. Their films a reliable delight for millions of moviegoers. His timing was flawless, his gentle befuddlement irresistible. But after the great success of those years, he retired quietly from the screen, and in 1964, following a tragic street accident, he died. He was laid to rest here in this vast and solemn military cemetery. And now, the gentle comic genius who was half of one of the screen's great partnerships lies all but forgotten among the endless white markers. He was, in the estimation of those who study the art of screen comedy, one of its quiet masters, a performer whose genius lay entirely in restraint, in the perfectly timed pause, the mournful deadpan expression, the slow and reluctant drawl that could wring more laughter from a simple line than a dozen broader comedians shouting. As the shiftless, endearing, endlessly work-averse farmer paired with his blustering wife, he created one of the most beloved comic characters of the era, and the chemistry between the two players was so perfect that their films became a national institution. He was, off-screen, a quiet and rather solitary man, a lifelong bachelor devoted to his craft, and after the great success of the series he simply walked away, declining to be typecast forever, and retiring gracefully from the screen. His death, following a street accident, came in the mid-1960s, and he was laid to rest, a veteran of an earlier war, among the endless ranks of white markers in a great national cemetery, his comic genius all but forgotten. There is something touching in the thought of this quiet, private, solitary man, who spent his art in the service of laughter and then walked away from fame without apparent regret, lying now in eternal ranks among the soldiers, one modest marker among tens of thousands, indistinguishable from the rest. He had wanted, it seems, not fame, but only good work, and having done it, he was content to disappear. And disappear he has, so thoroughly that his very name means nothing to most who encounter the beloved character he created. To find him here, amid the vast and solemn geometry of the National Cemetery, and to remember the exquisite comic timing that made him half of one of the screen's great partnerships, is to rescue him, for a moment, from a very deep obscurity. Remember him, then, among his endless ranks of soldiers, the quiet master of the slow burn who asked for nothing but good work and got, in the end, only silence. He rests here now, the peerless Pa Kettle at rest among the soldiers. Let us travel now far across the country, to the hauntingly beautiful Bonaventure Cemetery near Savannah, Georgia, to the grave of Charles Coburn, the distinguished character star who was one of the most respected actors of his generation. Coburn was the very picture of genial, twinkling authority, a portly gentleman with a signature monocle who, after a long and celebrated career on the stage, became in his later years one of Hollywood's most cherished character players, winning an Academy Award and delighting audiences as lovable curmudgeons, wily millionaires, and matchmaking uncles in a string of beloved comedies. He worked prolifically well into his old age, a familiar and welcome presence in the movies of the 1940s and 50s. He died in 1961, at 84, and was carried home to be buried in the Georgia of his boyhood. And now, though his resting place lies in one of the loveliest cemeteries in all of America, the distinguished old actor within it is scarcely remembered. He had been a giant of the theater long before Hollywood ever called, a distinguished actor-manager who had spent decades on the stage. And he came to films only in his 60s, an age when most careers are ending, bringing with him a lifetime of craft and a natural, unforced authority that made him instantly beloved. With his rotund figure, his twinkling eye, and his ever-present monocle, he became one of the most recognizable and cherished character players of the Golden Age, equally adept at the lovable curmudgeon and the sly old rogue, and his skill was crowned, late in life, with the industry's highest honor. He worked almost until the end, a warm and welcome presence in dozens of pictures. And when he died, full of years and honors, he chose to be carried home to the Georgia coast where he had spent his boyhood, to lie in one of the most beautiful and storied cemeteries in all of America, among the mossy oaks. Yet even that lovely setting draws no pilgrims to him now, for the twinkling old gentleman who once delighted a nation has been almost wholly forgotten. His long life spanned an astonishing sweep of theatrical and cinematic history, from the gaslit stages of the Victorian theater to the sound stages of Golden Age Hollywood, and he brought to his film work the accumulated wisdom of all those decades, which is perhaps why his performances feel so effortless and so true. It is a strange injustice that so accomplished and so long celebrated an artist should now be so completely forgotten, his name a blank even to many who love the old films, his fine work uncredited in their memories. He chose to be buried far from Hollywood, among the live oaks and the drifting moss of the Georgia coast, in a cemetery so beautiful that strangers come from around the world to wander it, and yet they pass his grave without a glance, never knowing that a beloved Oscar-winning actor lies beneath the Spanish moss. Remember him, then, beneath the Georgia moss, the distinguished old trooper whose 60 years of craft the world has so carelessly let slip away. He rests here now, the twinkling old gentleman the audiences no longer recall. Let us travel now to a small and remote family cemetery in Spring Green, Wisconsin, far from any studio, to the grave of Anne Baxter, an Academy Award-winning actress and the granddaughter of a legendary architect. Baxter was a gifted and intelligent star, a young actress of real depth who won an Oscar early in her career and then delivered one of the most iconic performances in all of cinema as the ruthlessly ambitious young schemer of a beloved backstage drama, a role that has kept that film alive for generations. She was a major star through the 1940s and 50s, memorable too, in one of the grandest of the biblical epics. She was the granddaughter of one of the most famous architects who ever lived. And when she died suddenly of a stroke on a New York street in 1985, at just 62, she was carried to rest in her celebrated grandfather's family plot, in a tiny cemetery beside the great estate he built in rural Wisconsin. And there, far from Hollywood, the Oscar-winning star lies in a place almost no admirer ever finds. She had come from remarkable stock, the granddaughter of the most celebrated American architect of them all, and she inherited something of that family's fierce intelligence and independence, which shone through in her acting from the very start, winning her an Academy Award while she was still very young. But it was a single, unforgettable performance, as the sweetly poisonous young woman who insinuates herself into an aging star's life in order to steal it, that secured her immortality, for that film has never stopped being watched and quoted and loved, and her cold, brilliant villainy in it remains one of the screen's great pleasures. She was a major star for 2 decades, and more, memorable too in one of the grandest of the biblical spectacles, before age thinned her film roles, as it thinned every actress's. Her sudden death, felled by a stroke on a Manhattan sidewalk, shocked those who remembered her, and she was carried far from Hollywood to lie in her grandfather's family plot, in a tiny Wisconsin cemetery beside his famous estate, where almost no admirer ever comes to find her. There is a fitting strangeness in her resting place, for she who played the ultimate Hollywood climber, the girl who would do anything to steal the spotlight, chose in death to lie, not in Hollywood at all, but in a remote country churchyard, bound up with her family's very different kind of fame, the enduring architectural genius of her grandfather. It is as if she wished, at the last, to be remembered as something more than a movie star, to be reclaimed by a lineage of deeper and more lasting distinction. And yet the irony is that her single most famous performance may well outlast the buildings. So beloved and so endlessly revisited is that film, so that the schemer she played is more alive today than she herself is remembered. She lies in the quiet Wisconsin field, an Oscar winner whom almost no admirer ever visits, her cold brilliance flickering on, unattended, in the dark of 1,000 screens. She rests here now, the brilliant schemer of the screen at rest in a far country field. Let us travel now to the city of Dallas, Texas, to the grave of Dorothy Malone, a sultry-voiced blonde who won Hollywood's highest honor and then slipped from memory. Malone began her career as a fresh-faced ingenue, unforgettable in a small but memorable turn as a flirtatious bookshop clerk in a classic detective film, before transforming herself into a smoldering, platinum-haired dramatic actress and winning an Academy Award for her searing performance as a troubled, self-destructive heiress. She reached even greater fame on television, starring for years as the matriarch of a hugely popular primetime drama that made her a household name in the 1960s. But as that show ended and the years passed, the great roles vanished, and she retired at last to her native Dallas, living quietly for decades, far from Hollywood. She died there in 2018, at 93. And now the Oscar-winning star lies in the Texas city of her birth, her triumphs half forgotten, her grave rarely visited. She had begun as a wholesome brunette ingenue, pretty and pleasant and largely overlooked, and might have drifted into obscurity had she not made the bold decision to remake herself entirely, bleaching her hair a startling platinum and transforming her image into that of a smoldering, dangerous adult woman, a reinvention so successful that it won her the industry's highest honor for her raw performance as a rich, reckless, self-destructive beauty consumed by her own desires. It was a stunning transformation and a genuine triumph. She found even wider fame a few years later on television, presiding for years as the dignified matriarch of a wildly popular nighttime serial that made her face familiar in every home in America. But when that long run ended, the substantial roles she deserved somehow failed to materialize, and she withdrew, with apparent contentment, to the Texas city where she had grown up, living quietly there for the rest of her long life. She died at 93, and the Oscar-winning star now lies in Dallas, her golden prize and her smoldering glamour alike forgotten. Her career is a study in reinvention and its limits, for she proved that a determined woman could remake herself utterly, could seize the industry's highest honor through sheer will and transformation, and could then conquer the new medium of television as thoroughly as she had conquered film. And yet all that triumph and all that determination could not, in the end, protect her from the common fate, could not keep the good roles coming as she aged, or keep her name alive once her famous series had ended. She met that fading with what appears to have been real equanimity, retreating contentedly to the city of her childhood, and living out a long, quiet life, far from the industry that had honored and then forgotten her. She died there at a great age, and lies now in Dallas, and the fierce, smoldering, self-invented star who clawed her way to an Oscar is remembered by almost no one who passes her grave. Remember her, then, the fierce self-inventor who willed herself an Oscar and then let it all go, content, in the Texas city where she began. She rests here now, the smoldering blonde whose golden prize the world forgot. Let us travel now to the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, to the grave of Dorothy Dandridge, a trailblazing beauty whose heartbreaking story is among the most important and the most sorrowful in all of Hollywood. Dandridge was a performer of extraordinary talent and luminous beauty, a gifted singer and actress who shattered a great barrier when she became the first black woman ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, for her electrifying performance in the title role of a landmark musical film. For a brief, shining moment, she stood at the very summit, a genuine star of the first rank. But the Hollywood of her time, for all its applause, had almost no worthy roles to offer a black leading lady, and the parts she deserved simply did not come, and her promising career stalled and then collapsed, dragging her into financial ruin and private heartbreak. In 1965, she died, alone and nearly bankrupt, at just 42. Her ashes were placed in a modest niche in a great cemetery, and though her importance is at last being recognized anew, for many years she lay almost entirely forgotten. Hers is a story to break the heart and to shame an industry, for she was a performer of the first rank, a woman of ravishing beauty and real and varied gifts, a singer and a dancer, and a dramatic actress who, against every obstacle her era threw in her path, forced open a door that had been sealed shut, becoming the first black woman ever recognized with a nomination for the highest prize an actress can receive. For one dazzling moment, the world seemed to lie open before her. But the cruel truth was that the Hollywood that had applauded her had almost nothing to offer her afterward. No roles worthy of her gifts, no path forward for a black leading lady however talented, and the doors that should have opened stayed closed, and her career withered, and her personal life brought fresh sorrows, and she slid into debt and despair. Her death, alone and all but bankrupt at 42, was a tragedy that the industry took far too long to reckon with. Her modest niche in a great cemetery went largely unvisited for decades, though a new generation has begun, at last, to honor the trailblazer she was. Her tragedy was not one of personal failing, but of a cruel and narrow age that could celebrate her genius for a single glorious moment and then find no place for it. And in that sense, her forgetting is the most damning of all the ones we have witnessed tonight, an indictment not of the fickleness of fame but of the injustice of her times. She had kicked open a door at enormous cost, and then watched it swing shut again in her face, and the despair of that, the sense of a great talent with nowhere to go, poisoned her final years. It is only in our own time that the world has begun to grasp the magnitude of what she was and what she suffered, to make films and write books about her, to lay flowers at last at her long-neglected niche. She rests in a great cemetery among many who were lesser artists and greater legends, and the slow, belated justice now being done to her memory is the one consolation in a story otherwise almost unbearably sad. She rests here now, the trailblazer the world honored too late and forgot too soon. And so we come to the final grave of our long and tender journey, and it belongs to a beloved old actor whose story is the most heartbreaking illustration of our theme that could possibly be imagined. Let us travel to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, to the newly marked resting place of Edmund Gwenn, the gentle character actor cherished by all the world as the screen's most perfect Santa Claus. Gwenn was a wonderful Old English actor, the beloved player who won an Academy Award for his unforgettable portrayal of a department store Kris Kringle who may just be the real Father Christmas. A performance so warm and so magical that families still watch it together every single Christmas, generation after generation. He was a cherished and familiar face for decades, but his final years were sad and difficult ones, marked by illness and financial trouble, and he died in 1959 in a home for aged actors, nearly 82 years old. His body was cremated, and here his story takes a turn so poignant it could break your heart, for his ashes were placed in an urn that was somehow never claimed and forgotten, left to sit in a storage vault of a crematory for more than 60 years, the beloved screen Santa utterly and literally forgotten. And only recently, in our own decade, were his lost ashes at last discovered by devoted researchers and given, in a moving ceremony, the honored resting place he had so long been denied. He had been a distinguished actor for more than 60 years, a veteran of the London stage who had worked with the greatest playwrights of his youth before finding, in his old age in Hollywood, a warm and beloved second career as one of the screen's most cherished character players, culminating in that one perfect, immortal performance as the twinkling old man who insists, against all reason, and to the joy of millions, that he truly is Santa Claus. It is a performance suffused with such genuine sweetness and belief that it has become woven into the very fabric of the holiday for countless families. That the actor who gave the world so warm and so enduring a gift should have ended his own days in illness and financial hardship in a home for aged and forgotten performers is sad enough. But that his ashes should then have been abandoned and lost, left to gather dust in a forgotten vault for over 60 years, while the world watched his Santa Claus every December, is an irony so perfect and so painful that it stands as the very emblem of everything our long walk has mourned. That he has at last been found and honored and given a proper resting place is the one small mercy in the tale. There could be no more fitting soul with whom to end our long walk among the forgotten, for his story contains within it every strand of sorrow we have followed tonight, the great fame and the total forgetting, the joy given to millions and the loneliness of the end, the beloved face on the screen every winter and the abandoned urn gathering dust in the dark. that the world could watch his warm, twinkling Santa Claus every single Christmas, could love that performance across 3 generations, and yet could let the actual ashes of the man who created it lie lost and unclaimed for over 60 years, is the most perfect and painful parable of celebrity and its forgetting that one could ever devise. And that he was found at last, and carried in honor to a proper grave in the heart of Hollywood, offers the one note of grace on which our sorrowful journey can end, the reminder that even the most completely forgotten can sometimes be remembered again. He rests here now, the forgotten Santa found and honored at the very last. And so, dear friends, our long and melancholy walk among the forgotten stars of Hollywood's golden age comes gently to its close. We have wandered from the grand mausoleums of the great studio cemeteries to a lonely field in Wisconsin, from the Georgia coast to the California desert, and everywhere we have found the same quiet heartbreak, the same faded flowers, the same silence where once there was the roar of adoring crowds. 30 of them we have visited now, 30 men and women who were, in their day, among the most beloved and dazzling human beings on the face of the earth, whose faces filled the dreams of millions, whose names were spoken with longing in every corner of the world, and who now lie in a neglect so complete that most who pass their graves have never heard of them at all. It is the oldest and the gentlest of sorrows, this fading of the light, and it comes for all of us in the end, for the greatest star and the humblest soul alike. But it need not be the final word, for memory is a kind of resurrection, and every time a name is spoken with warmth, every time a traveler pauses at a forgotten grave to wonder at the life it marks, a little of that vanished light flickers back to life. That is the small and loving work that we have done tonight. We have spoken their names. We have remembered their beauty and their talent and their heartbreak. We have brought them, at the last, the only flowers that never wither, the flowers of remembrance. There is a thought worth carrying home from a night like this, and it is not, I hope, a bleak one, though it begins in sorrow. It is this, that fame was never the thing that mattered, not for them, and not for us. The adoration of strangers is a fire that warms for a season and then goes cold, and to build a life upon it is to build upon the sand. What these 30 were, beneath the fame, were human beings, gifted and striving and frightened and hopeful, who did beautiful work and knew love and loss, and did their best with the brief, bright span that was given them, exactly as we all must. The forgetting that has swallowed them will one day swallow the biggest stars now living, and, gentler and sooner, each of us as well. And that is not a cause for despair but for tenderness, a reason to love one another better while the light still holds, and to remember that the measure of a life was never how long the world applauded it, but how truly it was lived, and how well it was loved. Rest well then, all 30 of you, you who were so adored and are so unjustly forgotten. Rest well then, all 30 of you, you who were so adored and are so unjustly forgotten, and know that on this night at least you were remembered, and honored, and loved. And rest well to you, my companions, who walked this sorrowful and beautiful road beside me and helped to keep their memory alive. Hold your own bright days gently, for they too will pass, and be kind to one another while there is time. And until we walk together again, good night.